The studio lights hummed, a faint electric hymn that filled the air like a held breath. Could a single question unravel a legend? The set was intimate, almost suffocating. Two low-slung leather chairs, their black upholstery catching the glow of soft spots, faced each other across a glass coffee table so polished it mirrored the camera's red blinking eyes. 3 lenses watched, wide shot framing the scene, mid on the guest, close on the interviewer. Microphones, clipped to lapels, whispered with every shift of fabric. A small studio audience, 30 souls at most, sat hushed, their phones dimmed but itching to capture the moment. George Stephanopoulos adjusted his tie, a navy silk knot that caught the light like a bruise. His face, lined with the weight of 1,000 interviews, presidents, poets, pariahs, held a practiced calm. But his left hand, resting on a notepad, tapped a pen once, twice, betraying a flicker of anticipation. Across from him sat Denzel Washington, his posture regal, legs crossed, one hand draped over the armrest like a king surveying a court. His charcoal suit was tailored to a razor's edge, but a faint scar under his collar peeked out, a jagged whisper of a past untold. The air smelled of warm metal and faint cologne, a stage set for civility, or its collapse. "Mr. Washington, thank you for joining us," George began, his voice smooth as polished oak. "It's been a year since your last project. How's this moment in your life feeling?" Denzel's lips curved, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Grateful, George. Always grateful. But you know, moments like this, they're a mirror. You see what you've built, and what's still unfinished." His voice was low, deliberate, each word a stone placed carefully on a path. The audience leaned forward, a soft rustle of fabric. George nodded, jotting a note. The pen scratched, a sound sharp enough to cut through the hum of the lights. "Unfinished," he echoed. "That's an interesting word. Your career, Oscars, iconic roles, feels complete to so many. What's left undone for you?" The camera tightened on Denzel's face, catching the faint twitch of his jaw. "Complete?" He chuckled, a sound like gravel underfoot. "Nobody's complete, George. You build a house, you still gotta fix the cracks. I'm still building." His fingers brushed the scar under his collar, an unconscious gesture, fleeting as a shadow. For a moment, his eyes softened, as if peering into a memory, a child's laugh, a street corner long ago, then hardened again. George tilted his head, empathetic but probing. "You've always been private about those cracks. Your fans know the triumphs, Training Day, Malcolm X, but less about the man behind them. Is that privacy a shield or a choice?" The audience stirred, a faint murmur. A producer in the control room, visible through a glass pane, whispered into a headset, her voice a muted buzz, "Keep it light for now." Denzel's gaze flicked to the lights, then back to George. "Privacy's control," he said, his tone clipped, an aphorism polished to a blade. "You give the world what it needs, not what it wants. Otherwise, they'll take it all." The camera pulled back, catching the table's sheen, a chipped porcelain cup of water trembling slightly as Denzel leaned forward. George's pen paused. "That's a powerful way to frame it," he said. "But let's talk about what the world needs. You've shaped culture, films that confront race, justice, power. Yet some critics say your roles lately lean safer. Less risk. Do you feel that pressure to stay iconic?" Denzel's laugh was sharp, a bark that made the audience flinch. "Safe?" He uncrossed his legs, his shoe tapping the floor once, a soft thud. "George, safe is for people who don't know loss. Every role I take, I'm betting something, time, truth, a piece of me. Critics? They don't bet. They just write." The microphone wire sang faintly as he shifted, a high whine in the quiet. George's eyes narrowed, but his voice stayed even. "Fair point. But let's pivot to legacy. You've spoken about mentorship, about giving back. Yet there's a narrative out there. Some say you've distanced yourself from younger actors, especially those vocal about systemic issues. Is that distance intentional?" The air tightened. A crew member off stage exchanged a glance with the floor manager, their eyes wide. Denzel's hand, resting on the chair, curled slightly, knuckles whitening. Distance? He said, his voice low but edged with steel. I don't owe anyone my proximity, George. I've given scholarships, workshops, quiet work. But folks want a performance, not the truth. They want me on their stage, not mine. George leaned forward, his notepad forgotten. That word again, truth. You've built a career on it, but truth can be slippery. When you choose what to show, what to hide, isn't that a kind of performance too? The camera cut to a reaction shot. An audience member, a young woman, clutched her phone, her thumb hovering over the record button. Denzel's eyes flicked to her, then back to George. Performance? He said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Visibility's theft, George. You show one piece, they take 10. You don't get to choose what they steal. His fingers brushed the scar again, a reflex, and for a split second, his face cracked, a flash of something raw, a boy who'd once run from something bigger than himself. The studio lights buzzed louder, or maybe it only felt that way. George's pen tapped once, a deliberate beat. Let's talk about that theft, he said, his tone shifting, no longer curious but incisive. You've got a platform most dream of. Power, influence. But with that comes responsibility. Some say you've sidestepped it, dodged the harder conversations about accountability, about how privilege, even hard-earned, shapes what you owe others. How do you answer that? Denzel's breath caught, a sharp inhale that made the microphone crackle. The audience froze, their collective silence await. A producer's voice hissed through the control room, he's pushing too far. George didn't flinch, his eyes locked on Denzel's. The camera tightened on Denzel's left hand, gripping the armrest, the leather creaking under his fingers. You want to talk accountability? Denzel said, his voice a low growl, each word a stone dropped into still water. I've carried stories nobody else could. I've fought for roles that weren't written for me. Oh? I've paid, George. More than most. His eyes burned, but there was a tremor in his voice, a crack no one expected. George's face softened, but only for a moment. He leaned back, his pen still. Paid, yes. But payment isn't absolution. You've spoken about wounds, yours, others. When does a man like you, who's climbed so high, stop to lift others up? Or is the climb too steep to look back? The studio inhaled, a collective gasp so soft it barely registered. Denzel's chair scraped, a harsh screech against the polished floor. His hand tightened on the armrest, the scar under his collar catching the light like a warning. The camera zoomed in, catching the pulse in his throat, the faint sheen of sweat on his brow. George's final words hung in the air, sharp and unyielding. You can't choose your wounds, Denzel, but you can choose who you heal. Denzel's eyes locked on George's, his breath quickening, a storm gathering in the set of his jaw. The microphone wire trembled, singing its thin, electric song. The chipped porcelain cup on the table caught the light, a silent witness to the moment about to break. Denzel's chair scraped again, a jagged sound that sliced through the studio's held breath. His eyes, dark and molten, bore into George Stephanopoulos, whose final words, "You can't choose your wounds, Denzel, but you can choose who you heal," still hung in the air like a blade. The camera caught the twitch of Denzel's jaw, the faint tremble of the microphone wire against his lapel. The chipped porcelain cup on the glass table glinted under the studio lights, a mute sentinel of the fracture unfolding. The small audience, 30 faces frozen in the dim glow, clutched their seats, phones poised but forgotten. Denzel stood, his movements slow, deliberate, a lion rising. The leather of his chair groaned as he straightened, his charcoal suit catching the light like armor. You think you know healing? He said, his voice low, each syllable a hammer strike. You sit there, George, with your pen and your questions, carving up lives like you're a surgeon. But you don't know my scars. His hand brushed the faint scar under his collar, a reflex that made the camera linger. George's face remained still, but his eyes flickered, a flash of fatigue, or doubt, buried under his anchor's composure. He set his pen down, the soft clink against the notepad deafening in the silence. I'm not carving, Denzel, he said, his tone measured but unyielding. I'm asking. The world's watching. They want to know who you are, not just the roles you play. The camera pulled back, capturing the wide shot. Two men, one seated, one standing, the glass table a fragile barrier between them. A producer in the control room, her silhouette sharp behind the glass, hissed into her headset, "He's going to walk." The audience stirred, a young man in the third row whispering to his neighbor, their words lost in the hum of the lights. Denzel's laugh was a low, bitter rumble. "Who I am?" He took a step, his polished shoe clicking on the floor. "I'm the man who built something from nothing. Who carried stories you'd never touch. And you," he pointed, a single finger slicing the air, "you think you can judge what I owe?" His voice cracked on the last word, a fleeting wound exposed before he clamped it shut. The microphone wire sang, a high whine as he moved. George leaned forward, his hands clasped, knuckles pale. "I'm not judging," he said, his voice softening, but only slightly. "I'm reflecting what's out there. You've got power, Denzel. More than most. But power isn't just what you build, it's what you break. Have you ever asked yourself who pays for your silence?" Denzel froze, his hand halfway to his collar, the scar catching the light again. The camera tightened on his face, his left eye narrowing, a storm brewing in the lines of his brow. "Silence?" he said, almost a whisper. "You call it silence when I choose my words? When I don't spill my soul for your ratings?" He turned, half facing the audience, his voice rising. "This isn't truth, George. This is theater." The audience gasped, a soft ripple that made the floor manager flinch. A woman in the front row tapped her phone, the screen glowing with a live feed already streaming to thousands. The control room buzzed, a muffled voice crackling, "We're trending." George's jaw tightened, but he pressed on. "Theater or not, you're here. You chose this chair. Why sit if you won't speak?" Denzel spun back, his eyes blazing. "I sat to talk about my work, not to be dissected." His voice boomed, shaking the air, and the camera caught the chipped cup trembling on the table. He took another step, toward the edge of the set, his shadow falling across the glass. "You want my truth? Here's one. I've lost more than you'll ever know to be here. Family. Time. Pieces of me. And you dare ask what I owe?" The studio lights buzzed louder, their hum a heartbeat. George stood now, his notepad forgotten, his voice steady but laced with urgency. "I'm asking because loss isn't a shield, Denzel. It's a mirror. You've inspired millions, but inspiration isn't free. What happens when the man they admire stops looking back?" Denzel's hand clenched, his knuckles stark against the dark suit. He was at the set's edge now, the black curtain behind him swallowing the light. The camera zoomed in, catching the sweat on his temple, the rapid pulse in his throat. "You don't get it," he said, his voice a raw edge. "I look back every day. Every damn day. But I don't owe you my ghosts." He turned, his foot lifting as if to step off the set. The audience inhaled, a collective sound like wind through reeds. The floor manager waved frantically, but Denzel's stride didn't falter. The microphone wire snapped taut, then fell loose, a faint pop as it hit the floor. The camera swiveled, catching his silhouette against the curtain, the scar under his collar vanishing into shadow. George called after him, his voice sharp but human. "Denzel, you walk now, you're choosing what the world sees. Is that the legacy you want?" Denzel paused, his back to the set, one hand gripping the curtain. The camera lingered on his fingers, trembling slightly, the scar a faint ghost in the dim light. He didn't turn. "Legacy," he said, his voice barely audible, "is what's left when the cameras stop. You don't get to write mine." And then he was gone, the curtain swaying in his wake. The studio erupted. The audience buzzed, phones flashing as tweets and clips flooded the internet. The control room was chaos, producers shouting over headsets, "Cut to commercial. No, stay live." George sank into his chair, his face unreadable, but his hand brushed the chipped cup, sending it clattering to the floor. The camera caught the spill, water pooling on the glass table like tears. Backstage, Denzel moved through the shadowed hallway, his steps heavy, the scar under his collar burning under the memory of old wounds. A young assistant, wide-eyed, stepped aside, clutching a clipboard. Denzel's phone buzzed in his pocket. Texts, calls, a storm already breaking online. He ignored it, his breath uneven, his mind replaying George's words, "Who pays for your silence?" In the studio, the audience was ushered out, their whispers a low hum. Social media exploded. Denzel walks out on Stephanopoulos. Clips looped, hashtags trended, hashtag Denzel vs. George, hashtag walkout. Some called him defiant, others entitled. A few posted stills of his scar, speculating wildly, what's he hiding? The chipped cup, knocked over, became a meme by morning. George sat alone on the set, the lights dimming as the crew packed up. He picked up his notepad, the pen's scratches now a map of the night's unraveling. He'd wanted truth, not spectacle, but the line was thin. His producer approached, her voice low. "You pushed too hard, George. But it's gold." He didn't answer, his eyes on the empty chair, the leather still creased from Denzel's grip. Miles away, Denzel sat in his car, the city lights blurring past. His phone glowed with notifications, but he stared at the scar in the rearview mirror, a jagged line from a life he rarely spoke of, a fight, a loss, a boy who'd learned to guard his heart. George's question echoed, what happens when the man they admire stops looking back? He didn't have an answer, but the weight of it settled in his chest, heavy as the roles he'd carried. The world would keep talking, dissecting his walkout, his silence, his scars. But Denzel drove on, the chipped cup's image lingering in his mind, a small, broken thing that had witnessed it all. He'd chosen his truth, or part of it. Whether it was enough, only time would tell.